What I've drawn here, I've drawn squares because today we're going to be looking at perfect square trinomials and we're going to be learning how to factor them. So if you have a square that's 5 by 5, what's the area of this square? 25 centimeters squared. Area of this would be 36 centimeters squared. What if I give you the area and I ask you to tell me the dimensions? You find the square root. The square root of 81 is 9 centimeters. What about the last example? 7 centimeters. And if we check, 7 times 7 is 49. 9 times 9 is 81. A perfect square is. What is a perfect square? What does it mean if it's a perfect square? Perfect square is a number that is not a decimal. So if I say find the square root of 25, what's the square root of 25?
5.
That's not a decimal, right?
That's a perfect square.
So that's considered a perfect square. Yes, you can find the square root of any number, but for example, what's the square root of 10? It's approximately 3.3 repeating. That's not a perfect square because the square root is not a whole number. So you need to be able to recognize perfect squares. I want you to tell me, copy these down and write down if they are perfect squares or not. Yes or no, is A a perfect square? Good. How do you know? What's the square root of 2? B, Louise. C, Anthea. 3 times 3 is 9. D, Irvin. E, Ethan.
No.
Good. F, Sapika. Good. G, Brenovan. H. So we need to be able to recognize what a perfect square is because we're going to be looking at how to factor a perfect square trinomial. Perfect square trinomial has to have 3 terms. So automatically when you see something with 3 terms, this is one method of factoring. You can only factor it this way if the first term and last term are perfect squares. So for example, 25x squared minus 40x plus 16. Which part of this trinomial is my first term? Which part of this is the first term? 25x squared is the first term. And what's the last term in this trinomial? Positive or negative? Positive 16. So because the first and the last term are perfect squares, can you find the square root of 25x squared? 5 what? Remember that when we factor, to factor means to find, the answer must be a product, right? To factor means to write as a product. So when we were looking at this the other day, our terms were just x squared. Well, what times what gives you x squared? X times x is x squared, right? What's the square root of 25? So 5, everyone agrees that 5x times 5x is 25x squared. The last term is also a perfect square. What's the square root of 16? 4 and 4. Now, the way that you can figure out what sign to put here is, first of all, you want to look at your last term. It's positive, right? But then you want to look at your middle term. What sign goes with the middle term? Negative. Whatever sign the middle term is, that's what sign you're going to put, because a negative times a negative 4 times a negative 4 is positive 16. When we expand this, if you subtract a negative, you take a negative and you subtract a negative, the result will be a negative. Okay? If it was positive, so let's try a different example. Okay, we'll try the example x squared plus 10x plus 25. Is this a trinomial? Yeah. Yes, it has 3 terms. Are the first term and the last terms perfect squares? What number can I put in front of x squared? 1. So yes, they are both perfect squares. So I know that I need to write this as a product. What's the square root of 1? So do I need to put that 1 there? X times x is x squared. What's the square root of 25? And the sign will be plus. Expand this and check to see that it equals x squared plus 10x plus 25. Yep.
Minus 2.
Good. Good. M minus 2 times?
M minus 2.
Good. Now, we can actually simplify this. I'm just going to write it over here. If you multiply something by itself twice, how can you write that? You can write it as squared. So I can actually simplify this to just put M minus 2 squared. Because your solution, your factored form, is the exact same thing when it's a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so B, Daniel, what'd you get? Yep. And good, let's simplify that. It's going to be B plus 4 squared, because we're writing it twice. Okay? 2C minus 11 times, good, or we can write it as 2C minus 11 squared.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.